Thank you for joining us again today for another episode of Pursuit of Purpose. We're coming to you live with another episode of What Are We Doing? And the series that we're on is called
Is It Right?
And we've been going through a very provocative discussion the past few weeks, comparing things that we put into our bodies and discussing whether or not they are morally sound, healthy, and how did they become illegal?
Yeah.
And are they right or are they wrong? And what gives us the ability to say one way or another?
Right.
And we would love to hear from you if you're out there in our audience, whether you're viewing or just listening, whatever the case may be. We would love to hear from you and your input. Today, we're going to discuss this from a different perspective. Both of us are dads. Mm-hmm. We have both raised our fair share of kids. My wife and I have, I'll say, moderately successfully raised, or we're in the process of raising our seventh little Raider in Lumberton, Texas. Mm-hmm. And the youngest we have is 6 currently. He's almost 7. And Chuck, tell us about your child rearing experiences.
Child rearing. Well, I married into 2 bonus sons who are now my sons. And then we had a third daughter who is ours. All 3 were Raiders all the way through. And then, I mean, to their credit, they are all, I guess, pushing forward in their careers. None of them are in jail. None of them have unwanted children anymore. That's right.
I'm kidding.
No, very fortunate. They're all wonderful, wonderful people, and very proud of them. And hopefully, had some influence on some of that. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about that today.
So the curious thing is, what if you found out that your kid, let's say your kid is a teenager. Okay. Let's say they are between the ages of 13 and 17. Mm-hmm. Because once they're 18, legally, they can, I can't say do whatever they want, but they can legally get away with more than they can prior to 17. So we'll say between the ages of 13 and 17.
Okay.
What if you discovered that your child between the age of 13 and 17 was using marijuana? Mm-hmm. How do you handle that as a parent? What would your gut response be?
Well, I'm not going to call out any one of the 3 of my amazingly wonderful kids, but I can say that happened. And I'll let the audience figure out, if you know any of my children, which ones it may have been. And so here it comes into our home. And of course, you discover, or they discover, I should say, that they're not as slick and sly as they thought they were. And so maybe these experienced parents figured things out and were like, but boy, did we start having some discussions. And it wasn't so much the to our audience, you may approach it differently. We chose not to just hammer their little egos into submission. We chose to educate. Do you know what you're doing? Do you know then everything from sources to influences on your system you're developing? You're not even fully done yet. I mean, it takes a little over 2 decades for the human brain and all this. So we brought in science. We brought in other types of information, and then a little bit of the character-driven things. And so maybe you and I can discuss when we broke some of that down, their mother and I. But I like to think it turned out pretty good, because I don't know that any of them really have a problem. It didn't. There was no huge rebellion or anything along those lines. But and they actually seemed kind of curious. And if I may, here's one subject that we brought up. I said, well, I can guarantee you this, given the time frame. I'm not going to be too specific because you may can figure out the kid. I don't want to call them out. But given that time frame, it absolutely was illegal in our area, which means their acquisition didn't come from a legal state. It came from some other source, like It probably came from out of the country into our country. And we were able to educate that child to say, you realize the people who grew that are not like horticulturists growing tomatoes and selling them at the local market. These people don't care what's happening to you. They'll spray anything they want to on those plants to kill the bugs, to get the harvest, and to pack that stuff up
to make the money.
That make the money. So in part, you're putting that into your system. And then we would ask them, what do you think about that? Well, I never thought about that. Well, that's why we're bringing it up. And that was one of the conversations that we had.
Well, another element of that is that your kid if your kid experiences this at that time, especially, but even now, when a child between the age of 13 and 17 buys pot, weed, marijuana, whatever you want to call it, when they buy it from the source, whatever source they're buying it from is a criminal.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter where they're from, whether from this country, who cares? Mm-hmm. That person is a part of a criminal element.
Yes.
Unfortunately, that person's already compromised their character in being willing to sell to an underage person.
Yes.
So if they have shown that they've compromised their character to that point, that they've proven they don't care about the health or well-being of anyone,
right,
much less that kid.
Right.
So what that means is they're willing to risk everything.
Yes.
Just to make a buck.
Just to make a dollar.
So whether or not you believe that the use of marijuana is okay for kids, when they tap into that illegal element, that's a whole different ballgame.
Exactly.
They're exposing themselves to potentially life and death consequences.
Yes. And that was the first place that we went before we got into any moral implications was your health and your well-being, because without that, nothing else really matters. Yeah.
And then to make things even step it up a little more complicated, not only is it the criminal element that they're getting involved with, they're bringing that criminal element into your home.
Yes.
Because those people who are of lesser character, they care about making money. They want to know if they can trust the person they're selling to.
Yes.
So oftentimes they'll find out where the kid lives. They'll go check them out to see if they'll tell on them, to see if they'll be a snitch.
And that's true.
At that point, this kid has exposed an entire family to a much less than desirable aspect of life.
Right.
And they might be hardcore drug dealers. They might be gang members. They might be, who knows what, they might be church people. Who knows what they are? I'm not saying one way or another, but the exposure is there.
That's right. And that was the one of the next phases of conversation was you're not as anonymous as you think you are.
Exactly.
And people know you, and they and these may turn out to be okay buddies, but it doesn't matter. At some point, you're going to connect with somebody directly or indirectly who will now know who you are and where you're from and all those sorts of things.
And the truth is, folks, the kids are impulsive.
Yes.
They're impulsive and they're swayed by pressures. We call it peer pressure, if you want to call it, even internal pressure from themselves. And they are looking for escape. They're looking for pleasure. They're looking for whatever to fit in, whatever it might be. So they don't think of all these consequences.
Correct.
So the question is, how do we as parents properly address this in a responsible, respectful, humane way? How do we do it? How do we teach our kids that these things, while they may not be necessarily morally reprehensible, they may not even be unhealthy. If you're going to go out and buy it as a kid and participate in it, you're exposing yourself to dangers that you don't even know.
Right.
And the consequences of that are far, far further reaching than just the use of marijuana in the moment.
Right.
There's a lot more to it than just that.
A lot more than just the high. That is exactly right. And so that actually became our approach. Our approach stayed in that line of thinking, which was just information about responsibility. For example, it's highly likely, and we found out that it was true, that our impaired child was driving. Now, whether they were at their full-blown impairment or maybe they were coming down and got up the next day, either way, that's a vehicle that we own and we're responsible for. And if they were to maybe say cause an accident or just participate, even if they got hit and got tested at the moment of testing positive, law enforcement doesn't care who was at fault. They're going to look to the person who is deemed to be impaired.
And see, that wasn't even an aspect that I was thinking of, in that moment that so you've got an underage driver legally driving, but still underage.
Yes.
Taking the risk on the family insurance.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about some long-term repercussions.
Yes.
If something were to go wrong, it could be the loss of life on someone else.
Yes.
You could be taking another parent's child away from them.
Mm-hmm.
And
at the worst,
the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
And then
to walk it back a bit, now you're going to affect our ability to provide for you. Because I can't put you back in a vehicle.
Can't trust you either.
Can't trust you. The affordability on that is beyond reach. So all of these little consequences, of course, I didn't expect a teenager to think of that. That's not what they think about.
Right.
They think about having fun. And I don't blame them to think about having fun. So we weren't really angry. We obviously took the responsibility, I think we did, to just inform. And now my child is now making an informed decision. And that was the parenting route that we chose. I mean, no amount of punishment was going to really change the past.
Yeah. And then there's the other aspect we learned on one of our previous episodes. I don't remember if it was last week or week before, that if a child, a younger person, begins using marijuana and forms habitual usage, not going to say addiction because that's a different thing, but forms habitual usage of marijuana and then continues that usage on into adulthood, they have apparently statistically less likelihood of being an ambitious person, less likelihood of being a high achiever, which I found to be fascinating.
Yes.
I didn't really think that way, I having been someone who never participated, I didn't really have that, just didn't have that train of thought.
Right.
So
statistically that is so.
Yeah, it's a fascinating aspect.
Right.
So if they start that young, that's another thing as a parent that you want to be responsible for, mindful of, and redirect them, that not only are you harming us in this moment, you're taking a risk in this moment, but you're taking a risk of forming a pattern of behavior that's going to have long-term impact on your life.
Yes.
Even though people will argue, well, marijuana is not an addictive drug. So habits are habits.
Yes.
And patterns of life are patterns of life.
Yeah.
And if you develop a pattern of escapism and using marijuana as your tool to escape,
yes,
then you're not dealing with the real problem.
Right.
And those patterns in childhood set themselves up. You know what I mean? Like
yes.
When you're in a developmental phase of life, which that's what childhood is.
Right.
You don't want to build those type of patterns. And
I've had young people come in to my office. I know they've come into yours, mid-20s and up, maybe late 20s, maybe early 30s. And friends, they're angry. They're angry in part at their parents. And I'm like, okay, well, let's go down that road. And they may say a host of things, but eventually they settle on the fact that their parents will say neglectfully handed them technology.
Okay.
And it could have been a cell phone that had access to the internet in the palm of their hand, or gaming systems, or what have you. And their, I guess, unmonitored excessive use of that led them into these dark places, which could have been excessive gaming, could have been even pornography and things. And now they're mad because they're like, and they look at me and they say, Chuck, I was 12. What did they think I was going to do? So that excessiveness, without any type of regulation, obviously has long-reaching consequences, which speaks to some of those statistics you were talking about. And some of those kids do see themselves involved with those statistics. They struggle mightily. It's a heartbreaker because now they're aware, and now they realize this is something I'm going to have to confront for the rest of my life because I didn't really have that early childhood regulation. So when they see young parents among their friends who are now having, 2-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, are like, hey, let me tell you what happened to me.
Yeah.
And a lot of their friends can relate. Like, man, that's a good point. I didn't think about that. My parents just handed me, a piece of fruit from the knowledge of the tree of good and evil at 11, and I had no idea what I was doing.
And we want to be really clear. We're not being judgmental about people who may use marijuana. Even if you do it in front of your kids, it's not our business. We're not being judgmental. Mm-hmm. They do pick up on what they see more than what you say.
Yes.
So that's another aspect of this that we haven't ever talked about.
Yeah.
As a parent, I failed a lot. And that's just the truth. I failed.
John, I'm in that club.
In my memory, as far as I can remember, I definitely can remember far more failures than I can successes as a parent. And I can only imagine. And I know that my kids picked up the behaviors they saw from me, which is scary.
Right.
I failed in anger. I failed in pride. I failed in a lot of ways. And I don't have any judgment for anyone who, like I said, uses marijuana in front of their kids. Mm-hmm. But remember, they're going to do what they see.
Yes.
And it's just like drinking. I don't have any judgment about someone who drinks alcohol. I have a drink every now and then. Mm-hmm. But I don't sit there and get sloshed in front of my kids all the time.
Right.
Because I know that if I live that way in front of them, chances are that's the life they're going to lead.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
Remember all the statistics that were coming out in the 90s about smoking?
Yeah.
About how, well, if you grew up in a house with secondhand smoke and smokers in front of you, the chances are,
yes,
you're going to be a smoker and you're going to, you're going to die. Basically, that's what the ad council was saying to all of us. We've already seen studies that weed doesn't kill you.
Right.
That we've looked that up. We haven't been able to find a single study that provides evidence to say that there's any physical detriment that it causes to your body. But there's not enough evidence to say that it doesn't cause developmental problems.
Right.
We don't know that.
Right.
But it does create patterns of habit.
Yes.
And those patterns tend to lean more in the youthful side of things, tend to lean more towards the negative side of life than the positive, right? Because they take away ambition, they take away drive, they take away focus of goals,
right?
Being purposeful in your living. So in my opinion, just an opinion, I'm not a professional in the matter, just an opinion. In my opinion, it seems that it would do more harm than good for children to be using marijuana.
Yes.
Unless there's a medical reason, to cause that. Like we had a child with cancer who had to have Marinol in order to help her deal with the pain and develop an appetite.
Right.
That's not the same thing. We're talking about recreational use.
Certainly. We also know that there are measured versions of alcohol in certain medicines.
Cough syrup.
Yes. But man, that's the one thing that helped my child rest that night.
Right.
Of course, there's always the hot toddy generation, which is what I grew up in. And we would go to grandma's and we slept really, really well. Just saying. Yeah. So she knew how to put those kids to bed. And, somehow or another, I guess I don't think I formed an addiction, but
you survived.
I survived.
You thrived.
I thrived. Yes.
Little honey, lemon, and whiskey.
Yes.
Cured it all. I'm
telling you. Yes. Anytime we were asked to go to grandma's, we're like, yes.
And I'm sick, by the way. I'm sick and I want to go to grandma's.
Yes. And so I get an extra blanket and I get a little bit of little medicine.
So we would love to hear from you out there in the audience. We would love your comments, feedback, input. What are your experiences? Do you have any experiences like this? And I'm not asking you to sell yourself out or tell on yourself if you're a marijuana user or whatever. We're not asking you to, get yourself in any hot water. We would love input, though. We want to know what you think and how would you deal with it, or how have you dealt with a child bringing home marijuana? Or if you grew up and you used it as a kid and you got caught, what happened to you?
Yeah.
How were you dealt with, and was it successful? And we would love to just hear your input, feedback, and opinions about this.
Yes, I love the vastness of our audience. I know that there's folks in our age range, maybe a little younger, maybe a little older, that it probably did happen to you, at least something. I mean, if it wasn't marijuana, maybe it was cigarettes, maybe it was alcohol. You got busted doing something that you shouldn't have. Well, what happened? And was it effective? Did it get your attention, or was it the wrong thing? Now, fast forward, a lot in our audience have littles. And then you have teens, and some of you have adults, and we'd love to hear your response. Because, when it comes to you, a lot of times we're just kind of guessing, and we're trying to think of our child in the moment and our child 5 and 10 years from now at the same time.
Yeah.
And so that affected our conversation. And one of the best things, and let me suggest this to our audience, one of the best things I'm glad we did as parents, whenever we came into that knowledge, instead of just reacting in the moment, we got away from our kid, and which means we sent them to their room, go to your room, go away. And then we went and we huddled, we game planned. And we were a little bit ahead of it just because, we're kind of in that whole developmental game. But at the same time, we were able to have some healthy conversations. So when we left that room and went and approached I started to say the victim, but maybe we'll call them the accused. We were prepared. So the suspect, give yourself a break, give your child a bit of a break, and come out of that room effective. And so whatever effective information you'd like to share with our audience, we'll definitely pass that on in future shows.
Well, I got a comment from a participant on the show, and he asks, he says, another random thought was, I was sitting at a red light and no traffic anywhere near me. So we have these things such as marijuana versus cigarettes. We have people versus their deeds, contributions to society, and now laws. Many laws, rules, especially in corporations, are created with the best of intentions or in knee-jerk reaction to a negative event, but end up doing more harm than good in the long run. Overly limit our freedom, etc. The stoplight was making me think traffic control devices are created to control traffic. But in the early morning, it should be blinking four-way as at this point. It is inhibiting traffic rather than helping it. So much people around, so must people look around and then run them anyway? It's an interesting thought. So what he's saying is that laws are written with too broad of a stroke, and that they aren't built to provide for specific instances and circumstances. And I think that's a fair thought. I think it's a very, very fair train of thought. He sounds like an intelligent guy. So he used a traffic light as an analogy, and it's much like this with marijuana.
Yes.
Marijuana might be appropriate for one person or at one point in time. At one time in life, maybe. Should it be illegal? Should it not? Should the light be red or should it be flashing?
Yes.
Should it be go at your own risk? You take your own,
So thank you for sending that in. I want to add to that, if I may, speaking of the light analogy, which I think is fantastic. So obviously we have red or green are your extreme options. Yellow is you got them. That's your warning. But now lately, a lot of our urban areas have come up with this. If it's a turning lane and you got a green light, and then at some point the green light goes off and you get a flashing yellow. So you proceed at your own best judgment. Can I make it either before these cars get too close to me or right after they pass? And it's still a legal move.
And it's your responsibility.
And obviously, we know how civic law works. That took a lot of research and various things. But I'm noticing it just about everywhere I go here in Beaumont and other cities. And I think that's really a cool idea. It's putting more decision-making into the hands of the participant, the manipulator, the driver, if you will.
Yeah. Giving the autonomy and freedom of choice to the people.
Yes. To say, hey, I didn't feel safe, so I didn't do it. And maybe that, and thank you, I think your comments are right on. Is that the ideal approach to this discussion, debate, this consideration between, marijuana and then the other substances we brought in, coffee, other types of things like this? Is that the best move for me, or is it not?
So, like we talk about caffeine. Is it okay to give coffee to kids? Is it any better or worse, than letting a kid eat a marijuana gummy?
Right.
What is the pro and con to the two?
Yes.
So we know that there is actual empirical evidence that shows that caffeine causes harm to the human body when used in excessive amounts.
Yes.
There are deaths, actual proven deaths related to the use, consumption, or overconsumption of caffeine.
Yes.
There are no deaths related to the use of marijuana.
Right.
There has never been a documented overdose.
Right. Not a medical death for sure.
On marijuana.
That's right.
So on marijuana alone. Now, if you mix it with something else, then, there's no way to know about that.
Right.
But it's a fascinating thing.
It is.
How many of you out there in the audience sat with your grandparents or parents drinking coffee as a kid? Mostly milk, but a little bit of coffee in there, maybe a little, flavor or whatever. But I know I did. That's what got me started on my caffeine addiction.
Yes.
And I am a card carrying caffeine addict.
Yes.
And, I'm not even ashamed of it. But I also know that it can cause me pretty severe harm.
Right.
Over time, it raises blood pressure, causes just all kind of problems. So how did we decide it was right or wrong? That's the crazy part of this discussion.
Yes.
So if you give your kids coffee or let them eat chocolate, chocolate's full of caffeine.
Yeah.
How do we differentiate?
Right. Or sugar. There's not a participant in our show today who could make a fair argument that's convincing that sugar is healthy for you.
No.
Not one. But yet we give it to our children. We have whole holidays where all they get is sugar.
Yeah.
Bags of it. And for nothing, just being cute. And
well, we've actually taken almost every holiday and made it a sugar holiday. Christmas, candy, Easter, candy, Halloween, candy.
Yes.
So, Valentine's Day, candy.
I'm sure your extreme healthy people are like, why don't we just outlaw sugar?
Right.
Because obviously
but there's entire industries, multiple industries that without sugar, no industry.
Oh, now we're getting somewhere.
Be touching on somebody's pocketbook.
That's right. That's right.
It's a fascinating discovery when you look at things as objectively as you possibly can.
Right.
So we would love to hear from you. We appreciate all of your participation. Thank you for that comment.
Yes. We're going to check on the traffic light situation for sure. Maybe a future episode.
Well, guys out there, thank y'all for being a part of our audience. Thank you for allowing us to be a part of the pursuit of your purpose. We want to hear from you. Let us know what's on your mind. Let us know your opinions, your input about this topic. And is it right?